I'd like to start with Andre first by asking, what role do you see fashion as activism playing in dismantling rigid gender constructs?
First and foremost, fashion is a personal choice. It's the first statement that we make, and it informs the general public of who we are, our gender, our religious denomination, where we're from, what music we identify with, and the latter of which has a huge influence on my work for my brand Landeros New York. Fashion can be used with great effect to educate the mainstream and a wider acceptance of gender expression. And with a genderless approach, which I've adopted for my brand Landeros New York, I hope to do just that.
Fish?
I'd like to apologize. My English is not that great. English is my third language. So I think fashion and as an activism, I mean, in the long, women start to wearing pants, I think, because of Coco Chanel start to invented it. And by doing so, because she want to ride a horse, and during that time, it's the long skirt, it makes it really hard to wear riding a horse, and so she invented that, and she got criticized by people and women who are not agree that women should wear pants. And I think that's kind of like an activist that she wants to promote herself to have an equal right to the men, and so from doing that, it just by starting slowly, now we can feel and see that women start to have an equal right to the men in society. So I think, yes, fashion is part of the activism. It can be activism if you want it to be.
Yeah. So I think that fundamentally fashion comes from everyone's personal style, and it sort of trickles up. So we have countless subcultures in our society where people sort of assert themselves and introduce themselves to the world by making choices about how they present themselves. And that can be radical, it can be more traditional, but I think that this is where it begins. And every person sort of has this innate sense of how to be themselves. So once that happens, I think that fashion has this capacity to take a lot of street style and subcultures and bring them into the mainstream world and into the into the mainstream eye, and remind all of us that getting dressed is actually a very political act that we do every day. And I think that fashion sort of mirrors all the subcultures that we have in the world, if you're making good fashion anyway. And it may in some senses commodify a lot of the subcultural identities that people have and cultivate, but it does bring them to the surface. And that way we learn to interrogate these things and face them. So that's sort of in my mind, the fundamental starting point, the genesis of it.
I view fashion as an embodied aesthetic, something more that's more than just clothes, but something that pertains to race, body type, height. There are all these things that accompany what you see on a runway or what you don't see. And I think what you don't see is often more important than what is the visual at that time, because invisibility is a real thing. And in order to change cultural norms and set standards, there has to be visibility across the board of folks who are, of different races, of different body aesthetics, of different types all around. And so in terms of fashion as activism for that set of people, I look at it in very simple ways. Like, if you're looking at fashion and you see something that you'll never be able to purchase or comes in your size, but none of the models are your size, it sends a very clear signal to you in terms of what is desirable, what is appropriate, what is allowed in a certain space, and what is revered as something that's culturally acceptable. And so when you don't see yourself in that, again, it sends a clearer message, I think, than when you do.
Exactly. I think some of the things that you just talked about, as well as what Pesh had talked about, the example of Coco Chanel, fashion can actually be physically limiting your ability to move, limiting your ability to function. Do any of you want to talk a little bit about that personally? Have you ever had an experience with that where the actual fashion has limited your ability to function or exist?
Yes, I think a high heel, for example, is limiting me for walking, and so when I first moved to New York City, I watched so many movies. They will wear Pradas and all the series that portrayed women wearing high heels, and I was like, I'm gonna wear high heel every day in New York City, and I'm doing that for like 6 months, and I was like, no, nobody really doing that in the city. I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy the sneaker. I was like, I came here to be a model, and I feel like being in the street in New York City is like every day is a runway for me.
Of course. Of course, every day is a runway.
I'll just say quickly that as an attorney during the day when I first started law school, I had to have people send me button downs and blazers, suit jackets. And what I found is that because of my class status, I was unable to present in court appropriately as I wanted to because I had to get all my stuff tailored. Everything was a wish and a prayer for me. Like, I hope this is gonna fit because, the judge might kick me out. Who knows what's gonna happen? So I think it can be very limiting. I think there's no reason that a piece of fabric should be something that limits you from your profession or your comfort, but just based on your gender.
Oh yeah, or gender expression, yeah.
So with that, you're all in fashion in different capacities. What changes have you seen in fashion, specifically related to the complex and evolving relationship with gender? Has there been any movement in progress that you're seeing? Is there any trends that you're seeing that has actually been towards dismantling rigid binaries?
Yeah, very much so. As an example, like Selfridge's department store in London, you probably already know this, they dedicated 3 whole floors to agender, which I thought was pretty fascinating, that they actually had the balls to do it. And their concept is called agender. It's not he, it's not she, it's me. I thought that was refreshing to come from that point of view. And there's also a lot of other brands like, let's say, Gucci, JW Anderson, Comme des Garçons. All these luxury retailers are using their platform now. I mean, whether it's in fashion to do so, that's for you to decide. But I think that they use their platform now to sort of expand and have a wider view of gender expression.
What was the question again?
Have you seen any trends or changes in the fashion industry that's moving towards progress, towards dismantling the rigid gender binaries?
Trans models. Trans models. The agency that I started it, because I work in the fashion industry, I'm a fashion videographer. And sometimes when I want to pick the model, like for example, I want to pick African American model to shoot for big magazine, and I would get the response that were like, oh, can we use a Caucasian model instead? Because it's not gonna sell, the magazine won't sell. And I was like, this is what I got, a response from the big magazine, and I just really upset and make me like don't wanna work in the fashion industry. I know the fashion industry is very mean. Yes, it can be very mean. And I want to start something that include trans model because I see so many faces that were beautiful. I want fashion to be more inclusive and safe space for people in general.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think that we're seeing sort of a shift toward, there are all kinds of binaries, and I think that we're seeing a shift toward new body types, too, that we haven't seen a lot of. So I think there's been some attempt to be more inclusive of the reality that bodies are incredibly nuanced things, and we're not all the same height and weight and shape. So I've seen a little bit of that, and I've also noticed that as stores continue to have more maybe they're not moving away from being, sort of binary spaces. They are, I see like menswear becoming more feminine and I see women's wear becoming more masculine and not in the way we're accustomed to where it's like the boyfriend fit. The branding is changing, I think. Of course, there's still a lot of the same old stuff, but there's definitely like a very subtle sort of shift towards something more positive, I think.
I think it's an interesting thing. I think even in communities that are trans communities, there can be this very deep subscription to a binary identity. And I feel like what I have seen more that's been very powerful is our images and visibility around non-binary people. So people who identify as agender, gender neutral, have no gender. And I think those, for me, are very powerful as someone who is also gender neutral to see that come across the board, because again, when that image becomes erased, then you assume that your only place is as a part of the binary.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because as the mainstream is actually kind of inviting us more and more, they're also kind of holding on to the same types of race hierarchies, body type expectations, gender binaries. But what's also interesting, and something that we talked a little bit at South by Southwest, is the online communities that are building our own systems. I was wondering, Ray, if you could talk a little bit about that, as well as Zaire, since you're both kind of have very strong online presences, like how you leverage that to create space for different people.
Well, I mean, I think that people are so, they're so unaccustomed to seeing anyone that reminds them of themselves. So like what you're just talking about in terms of like non-binary identities, there are 3 people, including myself in the documentary I'm in, Suited, who are all non-binary. And so overwhelmingly the response to that has just been like, I don't even care what kind of non-binary people you folks are, like what your particular nuances are in your identities. It's just such a relief to know that there's, you know, some representation. And I think that the internet has, for a very long time, been a space where we can cultivate language and we can cultivate our identities with each other. So, like, I mean, I think we have all experienced this in some capacity. I grew up on the internet. I think a lot of folks did. And, like, back when I was a teenager, it was like, I was going on all kinds of like gay and lesbian websites, and now that I'm a 31-year-old, I'm still doing stuff like that on the internet. It's just a more evolved version of that has to do with my gender
so brave to
instead of my
admitting
sexuality. What did you say?
You are so brave for admitting it.
No, totally. I spent a lot of. I have a lot of trans kids that I'm friends with on Twitter that I'm like DMing all the time. I don't know if other people are doing that too, but I care about these kids very deeply, and I didn't have anyone like that to like message with when I was growing up. And I think that it's a really powerful thing to have these sort of intergenerational relationships, and to have access to people who are leading totally different kinds of lives than we are. Like, because someone may share an identity with me, but they might also live in a totally different place, like something completely different from New York, and a totally different class experience, maybe from a different racial background. Like, there's so many nuances in all of our communities. So I think that it deepens our capacity to build community, and it deepens our capacity to understand ourselves too, and each other.
Sure. So Brooklyn Boyhood, the collective that I'm a part of, has, as you said, a decent online presence. And I think part of the way we...
Yeah.
Is that?
More than decent.
The way we utilize that is to provide a consistent, powerful, affirmative, and positive reflection of Black bodies and bodies that are outside of what's stereotypically seen as desirable. One of our collective members, Dr. Van Bailey, is a size, I think, triple XL. And Van has really impressed upon me this idea that when he looks on any fashion magazine or when he goes to shop, he always sees the same models. And those models, right, in recognition of my own privilege, mostly look like me, not like Van. And I had never thought to be like, if you're selling a 2XL or a 3XL, why are none of these models 2XL or 3XL size? Ever. Right? So part of our charge is to, and also why are none of these models dark skin? Why are none of these models, all these different things that are not seen as beautiful in this country or not affirmed in this country? We also have a calendar that we put out on a yearly basis that you should really go purchase, because it's wonderful. And, we use that as well to provide that kind of reflection and that affirmation to folks.
I can attest. My mom has been buying the Brooklyn Boyhood calendar every year, and she gets the collective members to sign it. And she lives in Jersey. She works in Jersey in a really conservative office, and she puts it on her cubicle.
That's fantastic.
Every year.
I'll just
So
share
thank
that
you.
if we can get it
Amazing.
together, we'll have a family edition coming out next year, which we're really excited
That'd be
about.
great. Yeah. So on a similar topic that you were touching on, Andre, you were saying that Selfridges had dismantled their traditional men's and women's line for an agender line. And one of the questions that I kind of want all the panelists to think about is right now, gender neutral and androgyny is having a kind of hot moment in mainstream fashion. However, some have criticized that the definition of androgyny and gender neutral and agender is basically masculine leaning and without any feminine traits and on female identified models. And that kind of reinforces that femininity is only for a narrowly defined group of individuals and taboo for anyone who's been assigned male at birth. So I would like to start with you, Andre, and ask, can you tell me, in your view, what is gender neutral and what does androgynous style look like? And is there room for femininity in that definition?
Sure. Well, for me, I should first start off by saying that for me, there's something very seductive to liberate oneself from traditional forms of dress and simply use fashion to feel empowered. My initial journey into fashion, I've always enjoyed blurring the lines, so to speak. And for my debut show, I explored the concept of stylistically adopting feminine silhouettes on all of the male models at the time, regardless of race or sexual orientation. And then with my subsequent shows, my follow-up androgynous collection, what I called version 2, and my collection called Strange, I expanded the casting to include all members of my LGBTQ family. And it was that point that I realized that Landeros grew into something exactly what I had hoped for, that it was a voice for change, and that it could start with me, so to speak. And, you know, that forward thinking that gender-neutral design is more than just a man in a skirt cliche, but it can be found in the subtle design details, the contour of a raglan sleeve, or the fluid lines of a wide palazzo trouser. They're quiet nods in the design details, but for me, they speak volumes.
Pesh?
Yes. For me, I think androgynous and gender neutral, it can look like whatever it can look like. I don't mean it to be dismissive, but I think that when we begin to define and essentialize what it should look like, we run the risk of creating the very rigid structure that we wish to see dismantle. Fluidity is exactly as the name implies, every changing, and it should be pinned down by us or everyone. Let a thousand flower bloom is a philosophy at trans model. I say that because it's what it looked like. It can be, I mean, it looked like anything because in the history and in an ancient time, there are many, like for example, in Indonesia, men wear slong like this, kind of like skirt type, and sometimes people think, I mean, in this country, for example, they think it's very gay, for example, and in Asia, in different culture like Scotland, wearing skirt type thing for this traditional and religion type that they identify themselves, it's not gay at all. It can be look very, very masculine. Or in Greece, I have photos that I like to share with you. Like, you see this guy wearing pom-pom shoes, white tie and skirt, and he also carrying a gun. So this is very androgynous and gender neutral, for example. And even in Africa, you know, young kids wearing fabric, long fabric that's very feminine and androgynous if we consider today. But for those tribe and those people, they didn't really see it like that at all. In China, okay, yes, in Africa, wearing the like leather type skirt thing. What else? Yeah.
So I'm gonna start just by saying I love Harriet the Spy, and there's a quote in it that's something like, there is many ways to live in this world as there are people. And so I think that you can sort of adapt that to any realm, and I think that there is many ways to be gender neutral as there are people in this world, and as many ways to be feminine or masculine or anything at all as there are people. So I think that something to keep in mind is sort of similar to what you're saying. It's just like, this is everyone has the right to define gender neutrality for themselves, and it does include a full spectrum of masculinity and femininity. I think that we all know that we live in a culture that prioritizes and celebrates masculinity in a way that it doesn't femininity. So we see that all the time, and now we see it even applied to this new phase where it seems like the perfect opportunity to start introducing femininity and celebrating it, but it's not happening. So I think that's something we need to just like continue interrogating and continue just creating our own versions of androgyny and gender neutrality that are more inclusive. Yeah.
Androgyny and neutrality for me right now is reflected, I think, most in a brand called 69 US out of LA, California. And the reason that I subscribe to their idea of what that means is because they take what are gendered clothes and expand them in a way where the cut is not tailored a certain way. For example, from what I've seen, clothes that are read as feminine are often designed for a cut that makes a certain type of body more accessible and more visible, right? So it's a lot of times about access and heteronormative ways of desire that are not always the most healthy, right? So even when it's cold, right? A sweater, why is your sweater a halter top? Like, that doesn't make any, it's 30 degrees. But because it's in the women's section, this is how it looks, right? So all these different ways in which, even if you put that same piece of clothing on someone who was assigned male at birth, it's still a gendered piece of fabric, right? So 69 US, their clothes essentially have no real cut that is aligned with a certain body type. The clothes across the board are very loose. They're very baggy. Men, women, they all look essentially the same in this wear. I wish I had a clip of it, but to me that is neutrality because the actual fabric itself does not delineate a certain type of gender when you see it.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I brought that up is, as you mentioned, Ray, we often are seeing a lot of, even within minority communities, kind of the celebration of masculinity over femininity, a lot of the reproduction of toxic masculinity. And one of the things that we're talking about in terms of gender neutral, I wanted to bring this piece up because recently Louis Vuitton cast Jaden Smith as the star of their women's wear campaign. And in it, Jaden is wearing a skirt. And I was really surprised that GQ wrote an article about it and then posted it on their social media because GQ is, very hyper-masculine, very heteronormative, and they were talking about how amazing this looked. And then I read the comments. What do they always tell you? Don't read the comments. So you can see some of the comments there, and there are thousands of them, both online and also there was a pray-in for Jaden Smith, a Bring Back Our Boys pray-in down south. And so what I wanted to ask is, in all of your views, why is it still more taboo for people who are assigned male at birth to wear clothing that is considered feminine?
Sure, shall I answer? I had to write this down because I want to make sure that I got my point across. Well, we're still really far off in accepting any kind of female silhouettes on men. It's not the dress itself, but it's what it implies. For most of our society, a dress on a man immediately implies his sexuality. We've been systematically trained at birth to put things in boxes, to categorize, so that we can digest this information and have a sense of order. When mainstream sees a man in a dress, they're conditioned to make snap judgment calls, and sexuality almost always comes into question. The only exception would be a priest, cassock, or robe. And then I did a little research, and I read a piece by Mark Anthony Green, also on GQ.com, where he made it a point about reading an article on hypebeast.com website. And he says that the title of the article was, "How Can You Love David Bowie and Hate on Jaden Smith?" So days before David Bowie's passing, the women's line of Louis Vuitton, the SS16 campaign, came out featuring Jaden. And the online haters on Hypebeast went completely nuts. They went wild. But then, days later, on January 10th, the news of David Bowie's passing came out, and the very same haters that were celebrating David Bowie's life and legacy, I mean, it's the sheer hypocrisy of it all, how Bowie's a gender-bending icon. He's praised for all of his work, but in 2016, a kid wearing a skirt is completely unforgivable. I mean, that begs to answer the question, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, clearly.
For me, for a male to publicly play with a feminine identity is to risk long access to the power that he is granted by virtue for being identified male. It's also for this reason that male sexually identified can be acceptably explored only within heterosexual norm. When those boundaries are crossed, the cost of transgression is extremely high. And I'd like to add that we should study more about clothing in the historical in our society, in the world. For example, we should, when we go to the museum next time, we should focus about how Egyptian people are wearing, how they are wearing the clothing, the skirt. It's men wearing the skirt type thing, or even the warrior. They are also wear the fabric that look like a skirt, So when we have that knowledge, when we educate ourselves that, in an ancient time, the wig is also invented for men, and also high heel were also invented for men to wear, And if we understand this part, so I don't think we will judge by the clothing that people are wearing, or people are, choose to identify or express themselves how they want the world or other people to see ourselves, So we should look at it differently, and shouldn't be judging other people, how they want to express themselves.
So this all just goes back, I agree with everything that both of you said, of course. But this all just goes back to the fundamental truth of our culture, which is that it's misogynist, and misogyny has been repackaged for every community to be sort of undermined by. So I don't really know what to say about this subject other than that it's disgraceful. And I think that it shouldn't be dangerous for anyone to wear a dress or any kind of clothes that may be considered feminine. And the reality is someone like, Jaden Smith? Sorry, I'm not really with it. Someone like Jaden Smith has certain luxuries as the son of a celebrity or as the child of a celebrity. This is a kid who can wear these garments and continue to be safe, and that shouldn't, not safe obviously from cruel commentary, but safe presumably in their life. And I think that that's when misogyny has such a short distance to violence and to the threat of violence, that's the real thing to be talking about,
It's hard to go last. Last on all the questions. I agree with all three of your points. And I want to make it short. What I see in that, in terms of the taboo nature of it, is really the power component, like everybody's saying. And also, again, I hate to keep saying it, but there is a very real, deep politics of accessibility. And when you are taught to view women's clothes in a way where you're sexualizing the body that's under those clothes for a heteronormative space that is the majority of the internet, you're automatically going to react to that because now you're questioning, oh, this person's in a dress, but, I don't want to think about what's under the dress. It goes quick to that point because, unfortunately, humans are not that intellectually stable. So yeah,
It's true. So going kind of back to what Andre said, you know, I read that Hypebeast article,
Right.
and
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Can I show
completely
you
nuts.
photos? This
Yeah.
is David Beckham wearing skirt.
Ah.
Just in case, a little bit of eye candy there.
Photos.
I want to see that later. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on that then with you, Zaire, because there is I felt that there was also a race issue there too. Why was it okay for David Bowie to do that, but not okay for Jaden Smith? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I know we worked together on producing a fashion show at Brooklyn Museum, at which Brooklyn Boyhood presented a panel called Fashion Activism and the Diasporic Politics of Black Queer-Bodied Visibility. So I was wondering if you could tell the audience here a little bit about the panel, and also touching on the dynamic relationship between gender, race, and fashion.
Sure. Well, I don't have a fancy way to say this, but it's never cool for black people to do anything unless white people did it or do it after you. And that goes from everything from lips to hairstyles, do-rags. I mean, I can go down the line for a very long time. So in terms of Jaden, it wasn't a surprise to me that this young black kid is out here bending gender in the ways that he knows how and showing up how he knows how. David Bowie did it, Prince did it. There are so many celebrities who have done it, but he's being persecuted in this way. That didn't surprise me at all. But in terms of the panel, I actually made sure to make sure I get this right. The panel was in honor of Zanele Mahali's groundbreaking work as a visual activist capturing the socio-political lives of LGBTQ South Africans. This panel discussed the ties of Mahali as she captured evidence, embodied activism, fashion, and those things intertwined as activism. We talked about the politics of diasporic black queer visibility. Panelists discussed gender nonconformity and its intersections with race, ethnicity, and culture. The goal being to address the politics of black queerness in fashion, to illuminate the voices and lived experiences of black queer people, and to provide a platform for highlighting art as activism. So Mahale used a form of activism that is not necessarily new, but is very powerful in the context of South Africa, because at the time, in I think 1996 or 1998, South Africa passed an entirely new constitution. And in that constitution, they outlawed discrimination against LGBTQ people. So this was obviously a powerful statement, but it was a written statement with no teeth. So the purpose of Mahali's exhibit was to show that despite the new laws, people were still being persecuted. Trigger warning. Okay. One of the first photos is a photo of a passport in the hands of a woman. Each photograph came with a story to tell. So for this particular woman, she was LGBTQ. She was found sexually assaulted, half naked, with a pipe stuck down her throat. Right? So this is one example of the violence that was happening in South Africa and continues to happen in South Africa. Now, when you're considered a progressive country similar to the United States, it makes a lot of the struggle that folks go through invisible, right? You're considered progressive, you have laws now, obviously everyone's okay. So her purpose was to raise awareness around this by showing the faces and adding stories to them. So each story serves as kind of a timeline, kind of a tree ring that identifies the climate of the time and really gives you a good sense of what's happening and what continues to happen.
So I was wondering if you could also, talk a little bit about your experience that night on the runway and what that meant to you to bring visibility for a wide variety of different bodies, and also addressing issues of intersectionality on the runway in the spirit of the Zanele Mahali exhibit.
Sure. For us, it was important to speak on Zanele Mahali as that relates to black queer visibility in this country. In terms of the runway, I'll just say there's a video called Verge, what is it, just called Verge, that folks can check out on YouTube. My nephew was in it, and he killed it. He's 11, I just want to put that out there. But I think for us, it was very powerful to have folks of all different body types, of all different class backgrounds, racial backgrounds on the runway as a statement that, in fact, these people exist. And in fact, these people are fashion. And in fact, these people are some of the folks who birthed this fashion across the board, right? So to have them walk was just a statement to say, we're here and we won't be made invisible. So I think it was powerful for us to come off of the panel and down to the runway. That's myself, and that's Dr. Van Bailey, formerly at Harvard. He's now at UMiami. If y'all know anybody who goes there, let them know. He's incredible. Yeah, does that?
Yeah, no, it was a great experience, and definitely check out the video. So you also participated in our first runway show, which is featured at the end of Suited. Yeah. And I actually had the pleasure of hosting a private screening of Suited, and then I had to moderate a panel afterwards. It was really difficult because I cried all the way through. Yeah. It was fantastic. So for some of the audience members who have not yet seen or heard about it, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about it, and also talk a little bit about the role fashion has played in developing your own identity.
Yeah, sure. So Suited is a full-length documentary that just aired on HBO on Monday. So this has been a very big and overwhelming week. It's about 6 of my clients at Bindle and Keep, 5 of whom are sort of more masculine identified folks, one of whom is a trans feminine person. And it gives you a glimpse into their lives as queer and trans people through the lens of their fittings. So you get to know them at their first fitting, so do we, as the people making their clothes, and then you follow them into their lives and get sort of a snapshot into various parts of our country and various realities of being a trans person at this point in our history. It's a really tender movie, so I think that the timing is really good. These are just like very, it's only 75 minutes, so it can only say so much. It's limited, certainly. And it's only 6 folks out of an infinitely diverse community. But that said, these are 6 very tender portraits that I think will be a comfort to a lot of folks to see right now. And in terms of how style has affected, like, the cultivation of myself. So weirdly enough, I didn't really have a sense of my style or a sense of myself until I had a custom suit made in 2010. I was 25 years old, and I was going out for New Year's Eve with my then girlfriend, my now wife, hi honey, and she, getting ready for this night out, I could tell that she had already been through a lot of sort of self-reflection that I hadn't started yet. She had identified sort of the masculine and feminine parts of herself. She'd integrated them. She knew she knew how to get excited about getting dressed and how to represent herself. And I found that very attractive, but I also found that incredibly alienating. And I knew that it was time for me to actually confront myself and start really thinking about how I presented myself, both to myself and to other people. So I had this custom suit made, not knowing if it would help me do that at all, really, but hoping it would. And it was incredibly expensive, both on a financial and cultural level. I went to the East 50s in Manhattan and did not feel like I belonged there at all. But that said, after I coaxed this tailor into making me what we called a men's suit, I got a garment that introduced me to my body for the first time, and I saw my real silhouette for the first time, and that was the turning point for me. I knew that I had to find a way to treat my body and myself better, and to honor it, and to figure out how to make it feel good and feel like it belongs to me. And so now I don't, suits aren't necessarily the way I do that, but it was the gateway for me. And so now, when I dress myself, I don't have this sense of dread anymore. I have a sense of self-possession. And, anytime I'm anxious, it's not because of my clothes. It's because of something, that has a different kind of emotional depth, something that doesn't undermine me. It's something I just process and move on instead of feeling like a weight. So, yeah.
It's interesting. Suits can be a gateway drug.
Exactly.
On Dapper Q, I know that when we first started in 2009, that's all there were suits.
Right.
And since then, there's just been this growing fashion community that's come out and said there's a million different ways to present masculine outside the suit.
Yeah,
So I think it's been for some individual people, but also for the community as a whole that
Yeah.
it's opened up so many doors. It's interesting the power of the suit.
I think that it's important for a lot of people to sort of take this like very symbolic performative masculine garment that represents a certain kind of masculinity and then a certain kind of class and just like take it and transform it and customize it for yourself, queer it to whatever extent feels good for you, and then move on. You know what I mean? You decide to have to like make peace with this kind of garment.
Is that person on the third row, is that your client? He
This
has
person
really-
in the suit.
Yes,
We're talking about you.
Yes.
Hi.
he's wearing really nice suit.
Okay, no. But you
Okay.
look
Beautiful
great.
suit.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Hey.
You're wearing a nice suit.
It's super chic, very cool.
Yeah, it's really nice. They're great. So on that note, I mean, Bindle and Keep is just one of many different brands that are coming on the market right now and changing fashion. And it's really important. Bindle and Keep trans models is also very important. And one of the reasons why is because when a homogenous set of creators dominates a fashion market, the result is a lack of diversity and lack of creativity and the reproduction of oppressive hierarchies. So I wanted to ask you, Pesh, can you tell us why you started trans models and if you can talk a little bit about your experience as a trans model?
Sure. I started trans model because I wanted to create work for myself and other trans people, including gender non-conforming people that struggle, that want to participate in the fashion world and beyond. And at the same time, because of trans visibility is increasingly high, and I think the moment is just right to start something that kind of like help trans people. A big platform like this will help elevate their work, and it's kind of like big extra commitment for trans people, individual, to have something that, like a company, something that they can have a safe space that they can talk to. For me, I started being a model when I was 17. After I started to taking hormone, and I joined in different beauty pageant in Thailand, and after I joined it, I started to applying my photos at different modeling agency in Thailand and in New York City. I've been in a career as a model for 10 years, but I never have any modeling agency that interested me to sign as a model. So I was very struggling to find a work for myself. So because my passion is fashion, my goal is also fashion. I also obsessed with fashion, so I can't see myself do other thing at all. So I try to find a way to be involved in fashion as much as possible. So when I first moved to New York City, I'm a freelance model, and I also want to work in the fashion. So I start interning for Vogue Paris as a fashion assistant, and during that time I didn't really like how fashion people treated me because I was just an assistant. So I see that when how people interact with photographer or videographer, people really pay respect to those people. So I want to be like them. I want people to respect me. So I start to taking a film class at NYU, and I start to work for La Officielle magazine, Teen Vogue, shooting fashion video. And during that time, I have more potential that I can pull different model. So like I told you before that, I want to work with trans model or African American model, but the magazine didn't really allow me to do that. So that's why I just want to form the agency that it's kind of big big thing for the fashion world and magazine to see that this is the real thing. You can't just denying artist creativity, because those are not the target or those model will not sell the magazine. Yes.
Yeah. And you're also, Andre, a kind of a culture creator as well. I remember Zaire and I were actually planning the last show, and then we ended up at Pop Souk, which is a big designer kind of
A flea market, if you will.
flea
of
market,
sorts.
yeah.
Maybe some of you have been to it. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
it's at Webster Hall, and it has a bunch of independent designers. And right away, I think all of us just kind of like saw your designs, and it was just really incredible.
Yeah.
We were just drawn to them, and so
Thank you.
you know, fashion is a really interesting study in how we all interpret specific form of culture from our own points of view. So I was wondering, as a designer, how do your collections interpret gender, and also how do they defy conventional gender constructs?
You know, this was the one question I wasn't prepared for, because I think I kind of answered it before. But I do want to talk a little bit about unisex versus genderless, because I know there's a lot of back and forth, as you mentioned earlier, that, you know, for me, the word unisex, it's a term that implies a very reflective binary approach to fashion. It's an either or. It's either for a man or for a woman. And I think that the design is sort of secondary to that. And for me, going forward, when I realized that Landeros New York can be so much more than that, that term didn't apply for me. It felt really limiting, and I wanted my work to just transcend the gender differences and be really fully inclusive of the LGBTQ family and perspective. And I think that going forward, genderless or the word gender neutral, it felt right. It felt like home. It felt comfortable to me. Whereas the term unisex, I think, is for brands to just say, "Oh, hey, you know, guess what? A man could wear it or a woman could wear it, and you know, you'll fit right in." I don't think that really applies going forward. So I really wanted out the gate Landeros New York to be at least part of the conversation of gender neutrality and come from a place of inclusion.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Did you want to move into the Q&A portion?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Jenny. Gorgeous.
Any questions in the audience? I think there's one over here.
Yes. Microphone, please.
I have a question for all of you. A few years ago, places like J. Crew and Eddie Bauer, and they were carrying button-down shirts in smaller sizes. You can't find them anymore. They don't carry them anymore. It's like they think there's only one size of person and it's male. What can you guys do to change the fashion industry's buyers to recognizing that there's people who want to dress differently?
Have you looked at other retailers? Have you tried Uniqlo? I suggest you try Uniqlo, my friend. H&M.
I mean, I think fashion responds to money.
Yeah.
Yes.
So having a demographic of people who have money say to J. Crew, listen, our demographics aren't being served. We need you to. I know somebody that wants a smaller shirt.
I mean, yeah, this is where like collaborations come in handy. Like if one of us had sort of the clout and the money, or like represented enough money to approach a designer and say like, let's collaborate on like more sizing that would represent this like other community that you're not serving, then maybe. But
Or we're able to just collect enough people to make an
Yeah.
impact,
right.
to let them know where their shortcomings are.
This is true for shoes too, right? Like nobody can ever find shoes in their size. That's very limited. So yeah. Bigger sizes,
Magnus,
smaller
what
sizes.
size are you? No.
Yeah, and I agree with the kind of the collaborations. I think that's one of the things that Dapper Q does with our fashion shows. I mean, we have fashion shows that feature almost 80 different models, 6 to 8 different designers that are designing outside of what mainstream is actually providing. And when 1,000 people, 1,200 people show up, we actually are able to show the financial support, the demand that there is for other types of clothing. So I think that, we do live in a capitalist society, so your dollar does speak. But yeah, J. Crew is going through a lot of different changes anyway. So maybe go to Uniqlo or H&M.
Yeah.
They really don't make that many, with regard to SKUs, SKUs, or what we call sizing, it's quite difficult. And as you know, if you're a very small size shoe or shirt, the extra small is like either the first to sell out. And the same thing with a smaller size shoe for men or for women. Smaller sizes, they make very limited quantity of. And they're just, to your point, they're just assuming maybe there's not a market for that. But I think that hopefully with representation, they'll see that there's a greater market and a need for it. But I do know that they run very limited sizes or very small amounts of that size, especially an extra small or small size.
Actually, I have a question because this is something a lot of our readers ask, and you started to touch on it, and it's the smaller SKUs on the tail ends of both small, like extra small, and extra large. Can you talk a little bit about, like, as an independent designer, the cost of creating expanded sizing?
That's difficult. How much time do we have?
Okay.
Yeah, for Landeros, New York, we're still, we're made to measure and it's bespoke at this time. We'll be launching, hopefully in mid-July, we'll be launching our first e-com shop. So we'll be working on those sizes. But that's something we have in mind for sizing because I really want it to be representative of all the sizes that we need. But Magnus, my best friend, is sitting there in the row in the pink shirt. He works with me on Landeros, New York, and that's a conversation we always have with each other, that just making sure that we have allowances for the sizes, because it comes down to like an algorithm with regard to sizing. Most purchases are somewhere between the medium and large and small, but when we run into the very small sizes, like extra small or smaller, I wouldn't say there was a market for it, but I'm hoping that we can at least divvy up our money and that we have money allocated for all the sizes. I guess I can answer that question better in August. We'll see what the sales go, and then I can answer that better for you.
Any other audience questions?
Hi, my name is Kepler. I have a question for, I guess, Lauren.
That's my last name. Yeah, you're right.
Is that here?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the culture of fashion being used in psychological warfare in, let's say, the brown and black community? And do you think there is some type of message that is trying to be portrayed, like in the Jalen situation, knowing that historically certain parts of art and fashion have been used to portray a certain group of people in a certain light to push a certain message agenda-wise?
Wow. Well, that's a complicated question, but I think I want to frame it around what you mentioned as psychological warfare. Because I think a lot of the time people don't understand that even if it's not explicitly intentional, in other words, even if I'm not saying to you, hey, you're not X, Y, and Z, the imagery and the cultural, societal context, the socio-political context that we live in informs on a daily basis our responses and our abilities to envision ourselves in a certain way, right? So in terms of fashion, I think it is and has always been a powerful thing to me to continually see in a historical context the ways in which black and brown people, as you were mentioning, invent certain types of fashion and embody a certain aesthetic physically that is never affirmed in the cultural context in fashion. So like I was saying earlier, even the do-rag, I couldn't believe it when the do-rag was a fashion trend. Couldn't believe it. We've been wearing do-rags since 1985. That's when I was born, so that's all I can say. But but then there was like a blip in history where it's like, oh my God, do-rags, like I said, I can go on and on.
Sorry to interrupt, but even just like cornrows. Can we talk about hair appropriation?
Couldn't believe when that was a thing. And apparently it's reemerging. Ridiculous. So, and it's ridiculous because it's not acknowledged as a form that originated somewhere, right? That's where the danger is, right? If they were like, okay, this originated from X, Y, and Z, and you know, we think it's whatever, and now it's coming back into style, into fashion, that would be a different story. I think it still can be problematic in certain ways, but it would be entirely different from completely erasing a culture. Not only erasing that culture, though, but degrading that culture when they were doing it, right? So when you talk about psychological warfare, it becomes very clear when you're saying, hey, black person, you know, I see you wearing this, you look like a hoodlum. But now, magically, over here we wearing it, and it is just the trend. I mean, it really, like, actually burns me up, right? Can y'all see I'm getting emotional? It's crazy.
Definitely.
It's absolutely crazy. So I do think it is definitely a type of warfare, even if it's not explicitly stated all the time.
It's like you don't even own your own culture.
Right.
No.
We own it. Yeah. Yeah.
Constantly. And not only do you own it, but you're making money off of it, right? I mean, mad money, right? It's just like, I can go down the rabbit hole, but we can talk about this in fashion, we can talk about it in marijuana, we can talk about it in so many different ways in this country. So we should talk about it after this is done.
Hi. This is scary. Thank you all so much. I had a question about, you know, someone mentioned a lot of queer fashion is kind of, has been conceptualized around masculinity and kind of masculine appearing genderqueer bodies. And I wonder, as someone who feels comfortable around kind of being like a cis woman, around feminine presenting ways, how we can take up queer space. And so I wonder if you have any fashion suggestions around taking up queer space as a feminine presenting person, and any thoughts or suggestions you have around that.
Does anybody on the panel have anything they want to add about that? I mean, I have personal experience around that, being the owner of Dapper Q, and then constantly also simultaneously seeing my own femme identity being erased. But I do follow quite a few femme bloggers that I love. Asia Aguirre for Fit for a Femme. I want everything in her closet. She takes up a lot of space, and she's a woman of color, and I just admire her. And I know that Queer is a blog that expands a variety of different expressions and identities that's beyond masculine. But for me personally, I actually struggled a lot when I came out, because I thought that I was going to go into these queer spaces and be celebrated because it was a rainbow, right? And I was going to leave this like heteronormative world, and I was just going to be embraced. And I saw these different feminine, masculine hierarchies being reproduced over and over again. I actually dated masculine people who would like not let me walk on certain sides of the sidewalk because they were like, that's not what a butch does. And it's really frustrating. And what I've learned to embrace, because I actually like freaked out for a little bit, and I was like, I got to go to Urban Outfitters and try a symmetrical haircut and like be more visibly queer. And then I would like stand in the mirror and be like, this is not me. I'm just like a Betty Crocker type of, you know, pencil skirt wearing kind of gal.
And we love you, Betty.
Thank you. And I think that goes along the same lines as we were talking about what is really gender neutral and what is really queer presenting. You know, there's only one narrative that's being, you know, put forth. And now I'm really embracing the fact that I am queer and I look queer, and I'm part of that definition. And so I try to take up as much femme space as possible as well. And I also, femme style is transgressive because feminine style is made for cis, straight men's consumption. And I wear my shit not for that. I wear it for me, and that is transgressive as well, so.
Ooh.
Can I just add one thing? I just wanted to add to that really quickly, and I think you know this person as well, but Jamal Lewis is self-identified fat femme, and Jamal does like incredible work around that subject, so you can check Jamal out too.
was, Queer Fat Femme. It's also a good blog to check out. So, yeah, we need to start building these online communities more. So, if you want to talk to me afterwards, let's do this.
Hi guys, thank you. And I wanted to say that I'm from Dubai, and right now the queer community in Dubai, we're kind of stuck in the 70s of New York. So I was wondering, with you guys going through it, what are ways of defying or like challenging the gender norms without getting attacked, you know, in a conservative society? You know, or not attacked, basically just being safe in a way.
I mean, I feel like that's one of those things that, at the end of the day, unfortunately, does not live within our control. You know, at least for me, safety has been a constant question because we embody something that we can't separate from ourselves. So when you walk out of the house, right, somebody is going to be triggered in a negative way, a positive way, or a neutral way. There's no way you can categorize that. You can't tell who's who. You know, I mean, I think one thing that I do is rock in groups.
Right.
Yeah, critical mass.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the joys of being like a gender fluid person is that I can identify with almost everyone I meet in some capacity. I have a lot in common with everyone. I'm always looking for commonalities, right? So that said, that also exposes me to more kinds of harassment, right? Because sometimes I will trigger someone who's homophobic toward a certain kind of gay man, right? Or someone who's transphobic, or someone who doesn't like butch women. You know what I mean? There's like all these different triggers that we don't realize we're carrying around in our, I don't know, in the way we look and the way we move. But I agree with you, Zaire. I think that being with your community and sort of celebrating each other, that's, I mean, and also just like having critical mass like that and taking up space together is always the safest way for me to go out into the world. And it just depends so much on on where you live and what your very specific community is like. Yeah, I mean, and you'll find when you move neighborhoods, it may change even. You know what I mean? I used to live in Greenpoint, and I did not have a good experience living there. And I live in Bed-Stuy now, and I have a really good experience in Bed-Stuy. You know what I mean? So you could move 3 stops on the train, and suddenly you can leave the house without feeling the potential for harassment. But yeah, find comfort in your queer sisters, brothers, siblings. You know, that's the best we can do.
Can I just say one quick thing and then I'm gonna stop talking? I wanted to say, because I think it's important, that as a black masculine person, critical mass for me has often also meant police targeting. So I have been in multiple situations with Brooklyn Boyhood where, for example, we're all driving in a car together, we're followed around the block in our own neighborhood by undercover police with guns on their belts for no reason other than it's a bunch of black people in a vehicle that they think are black men, right? So, and which is not an isolated incident for me. I've been pulled over many a time. I mean, so safety, you know, it really depends on the situation. It really depends on how you are presenting, right? A more feminine presenting person may not be able to walk down the street in Bed-Stuy at 1:30 in the morning without having this idea of danger, whereas I generally can, right? So, I mean, there's all kind of different avenues to that, but police is definitely one of those things that we have to consistently think about in terms of our safety, as black folks especially.
I think from my experience, when I identify as being transgender, I always got attacked from people around me within my family member also attack me for, I think if you want to, you know, rather like keeping yourself and didn't really want to express, it kind of like hurt you more than expressing yourself. So I think if you want to express yourself, I think you should have a supportive group that you can realize on. And I think that express yourself is better than just keep yourself in the closet and not telling the truth. It's hurting you more than expressing the true self.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for the mortifying shout out. The suit is not Bindle and Keep, but my first experience in a Bindle and Keep suit was revelatory and changed the entire way I interact with my body and fashion, so thank you. My question revolves around attire in the workplace. So I work at a Fortune 50 financial services firm, very conservative. I'm coming from work right now. And I hope to one day run one. And so I am constantly around a lot of men. I'm constantly around a lot of conservative people. My company embraces me for who I am, in my opinion, but I have a lot of mentors, as recently as last week, encouraging me to femme it up, particularly when interacting with men that I have never met before, perhaps external clients or new bosses. But I'm curious, do you think that there is any benefit in covering who you are
Never.
to advance the greater good for yourself? Or am I really failing the broader community if I don't wear the tie,
Well, I think you should ask yourself this question. I mean, I feel like anytime you put a guise over yourself or try to sort of femme it up or let's add a fragrance, let's add a lipstick, you know, at the end of the day, if it's not... Oh, pearls, really? Okay. Actually, I can kind of see that. Pearl cufflinks, maybe. No, to that point, I think that the minute where you try to sort of dress for others, I think you've already lost. I think clearly, I mean, everyone can attest in this room, your style is incredible, so you've got that going on. You look incredible, seriously. And I think that the minute you try to change it up for someone or to sort of, you know, dress for what they think that you should, I don't think it'll ever work, and I think it'll come across as completely just false. And you're not living your true, authentic self, you know? So my advice is keep rocking what you're rocking, and, you know, let the men take some pointers from you. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I just want to say quickly, I agree with what you said, that if you don't dress like yourself, you're not going to be able to perform at the level you know, are capable of, right? So I don't know that you would necessarily be sacrificing anything by not femming it up for these external clients that you haven't met yet. I think you may be, you know, there's more potential to jeopardize your sort of professional self, you know, because you'll be self-conscious if you're not wearing what you usually wear to work, right? So, I mean, obviously I don't know anything else about you aside from what you just said. So like feel it out, do your thing, do what feels right for you. And obviously you're an ambitious person and that's important to you. But I have a feeling that you wouldn't perform, like if your priorities are performance, you know how you feel in a suit versus what you might feel like in some other outfit or with makeup or anything like that. And also your clients will notice the discrepancies, right? Because you'll maybe present more in a more feminine way, and then you'll go back to like your true self, and then they'll be like, so maybe that would be doing a favor to the community, because there are people who are gender fluid and do sort of want to be masculine or feminine and bounce between those things. I don't know. It depends on your comfort, really.
I think it's interesting because I think this also speaks to how powerful clothing is. When people talk to me about why do you spend so much time writing about fashion after work, isn't it kind of like, you know, consumerist or, you know, just kind of Kim Kardashian type thing? Not for certain people. And one of the questions that I got was from somebody who didn't have that kind of class privilege to make that decision. They wrote into us and they said, I've been out of work for a long time. I need to make a decision now whether I'm going to dress a certain way to get a job or not get this job. And they lived in some, you know, small town where it's not New York City, where you might be, there's definitely still bias, but this was going to make or break this person. And I didn't really know how to answer that. Because I was coming from a position of like having a comfortable job, and I get to go into work, and even though I experienced certain things dressing in a feminine way, there's also power dynamics in that as well. I kind of fit in with what society expects me to wear to a certain extent. And so I really didn't know how to answer that for them. So that's something to really contemplate too, the kind of privileges that we have as it interrelates with this power of fashion. I know for me, as a person of color, I can never change the color of my skin. So that's something that I think about when I go in someplace. It's like I can hide that I'm gay if I want to. I can hide certain things about myself if I want to, but I can never change the color of my skin, and I've always had to live with that. So I live very out and open because I embrace every part of me. And I wouldn't change the color of my skin, so I just wouldn't change anything else about how I present.
Hi, folks. My name's Lauren. So I'm gonna ask a question that involves content warning for like body-related displeasure. To kind of, I guess, echo on the flip side of the first question that was asked, right? About asking for smaller sizes. I'm wondering about what you are all doing to make accessible larger sizes or sizes that fit bodies that carry fat in different places, specifically for masculine like presenting people, but also, for feminine presenting people too, because not all feminine presenting shirts are gonna like accentuate someone's fat distribution. And that's specifically an important thing for me as someone who's been like kind of presenting masculine for almost 13 years, like by accident, because I was a fat kid, and then coming more into it with like accepting myself a little bit better, but then also not being able to have custom suits, made, and struggling with an eating disorder for a long time, partially to be able to fit into clothes. Seeing a diversity of body shapes. Specifically, I'm familiar with some of the images with Brooklyn Boyhood, and that's like really, really powerful. And seeing my friends, but also knowing that people, and like I'm not even as big as I have been or as big as other people I know who are trying to get clothes and present masculine. We are also a community of people who are either told to get custom clothes or to make their own clothes or taught to make their own clothes. And in a city that never sleeps, that's like a little bit rough. So what are you folks doing to make sizes accessible and to make larger sizes?
Yes, for trans model, we just recently signed a model that a plus size model, and we like to portray her as much and him as much as possible to the fashion world that those sides exist, and those sides also trans and queer people, and we need the clothes that could fit us also. So that's the part of my job that I'm trying to represent queer people who want to wear, who are different sizes, But it's became a very big challenge because it's hard for us to find a gig for the model to fit into those type of sizes, because the fashion industry were just telling us that the model that we are looking for is not the size that you want. It's just sample size. And actually, recently, IMG models has signed the plus size male model for the first time. So I think eventually in the future, you might see some plus size male model and plus size women models on the cover of the magazine more. I think so. I think that.
Definitely. I think, for my brand specifically, like I said, we're made to measure, but I'm not model size. So I'm already having that going in designing clothes for just a larger audience, for bigger sizes. Like I said, my best friend Magnus, he's 6'7". He has the height, he can carry it. I enjoyed making clothing for him. It's, you know, I love doing it. He can carry it off. He's got the silhouette. It's fantastic. So going in, I'm always conscious of that. And, you know, whether I rock a smaller size for the models to fit into, or I make larger sizes, for me it's all the same. But I've been really conscious of taking our financial resources and just kind of giving it up and allowing for larger sizes, because I'd like to wear the brand that I create. And like I said, I'm no longer a size 30 waist or size 31 waist. And I embrace it and I own it and I make clothing for that. So it's always in my mind. And going forward, as we mass produce, I will definitely have equal sizes from the very, very small size to larger sizes and everything in between, for sure.
I know for Dapper Q, we try to find images and models that we can showcase, but one of the issues is that we're not designers, and so when we ask designers what the issues are, is that a lot of this system is set up to just keep the system the way that it is. A lot of independent designers cannot keep up with the pricing and the mass production that Uniqlo and H&M does. So what happens is that they have to run smaller lines with kind of narrower sizes, and then it's really expensive. And then a lot of queer designers are going bust because the queer community, who's also financially oppressed and doesn't have access, they don't have the money to spend on it. So it's this constant cycle. So the system is set up to be a certain way. So what we try to do is we try to showcase, you know, we try to show that there is a demand for it, but I think also too voting with your dollar. You know, maybe spending a little less money on a lot of things from, I don't know, Forever 21, and maybe investing more in like queer brands to help them that are producing those sizes to help them survive. So I know a few brands were making wider size, like broader range of sizes, and then they just went bust because nobody was buying it. So it's difficult.
Well, something you were talking about, Zaire, was the runway show and seeing the reality that so many different kinds of bodies and identities exist in this world that we don't typically see, and it's just proof we do exist, right? And I think that we're all trying to contribute to that proof. I know that, like, my biggest problem with custom clothes, obviously, is that they're so expensive and so inaccessible, just like almost the entire community. So the best I can do with like this limited thing that I work within is put bodies that we're not accustomed to seeing clothes on, clothes that fit, clothes that make people feel good. Put those bodies in clothes and make them seen and demonstrate that those bodies look good, they feel good, and they deserve to. And I would say, like, you know, half the folks in the film, and who knows what a film can really do to an industry, I don't know, you know, but three of our six clients in the film have always struggled with sizing. You know, they can never find anything big enough or the right shape or the right proportions. And it's, you know, that's true for most people, but it's a different scale, right? And I hope that the reality that, like, such a huge number of people are being underserved and overlooked will eventually, I mean, sooner rather than later, obviously, like, strike someone who has some control over this stuff, you know, and maybe this is like another thing where we'll have to crowdsource for our own community, you know, and like, that's seemingly what tends to happen, right? We, you know, society creates problems for us and we solve them for ourselves, right?
Yeah, you already spoke to some of the imagery that you've seen as a collective from Brooklyn Boyhood. I think that in addition to that, I think that it's important and that we try to engage with the language around sizing as well, right? Because you have all the different sizes, and then you have your petite, you've got your plus size, you've got all these different things, when in reality, each size is a human size. Yeah. I've actually never understood what plus size exactly means, because these are bodies that look like my, like, cousins and aunties. I mean, these are regular bodies, right? So, you know, kind of interrogating that and making sure that in particular for myself as someone who is privileged around seeing my reflection on the websites and in fashion in this very specific way, that I'm challenging that as well, challenging that language and asking these questions that I wasn't asking before Dr. Bailey brought it to my attention, right? So it's a very real thing when you have that privilege and you don't have to think about it. And so I always encourage other people to think about it. But right now, we're also not designers, so our kind of corner is the imagery and the visibility, which we're trying to produce more of.
I think we have time for one more question. I saw a hand.
Hi. Sorry. Hi. I just wanted to ask, since you guys knew that you were defying the norm, like when you started your brands, like how did you decide for yourself that, hey, there's no market for what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try it anyway, right? Like, and my second question is like, how did you find support for what you were doing?
Well, I can say for me, originally I started Landeros New York as a menswear brand at first. Just I've always had this, I guess, childhood fantasy of designing men's clothes. And in development of the debut show, I decided, okay, out the gate, I'm going to be all-inclusive, at least of all men and all different races and ethnicities and sexual orientations, but primarily men. And then as I was designing the collection and we were casting the show and I saw the lineup, I said, you know what, I'm really doing myself here a disservice. I realized that it could be so much more. And that's kind of when the light went on, excuse me, and I realized that, you know, I want to be a lot more inclusive. Like, why stop here? Why just start doing feminine silhouettes on very butch men of color? You know, I can say so much more. And then the support quickly came just from friends and family. My LGBTQ brothers and sisters came around. They were curious about purchasing bags or accessories. And I felt like, you know, hey, I've got some support here. And then going forward, and the close friends and family said, you know what, go for it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to expand my range, if you will, and include everyone. And I feel like the brand keeps evolving for me as I design each collection. But I think in the beginning, you lean toward friends and family, and the community has shown so much support for me that I was overwhelmed, and I realized, you know what, I've got the voice now, let me do it. And I guess I'm not looking back.
For trans model, First, I found two mentors that really helped and support me, and they were working in the fashion industry. And even my roommate, she also trans, and I also represent her in my agency. She's a makeup artist. So finding friend and mentor is very important to help you to achieve your goal. I think it's important to have those type of people who willing to contribute and understand your goal and help you elevate your goal into the point that you want to succeed. Sometimes, you know, my goal is I just want to create work for myself, but doing that, it helped me to realize that my work is more than just helping myself, but also helping other people. And that's successful. I didn't really expect that. It came with it. It came when you really have passion and you just want to, you know, succeed and on your goal.
Sure. No. Great. Well, for Brooklyn Boyhood, I think the co-founder, Ryan Holmes, would be able to speak to that more specifically. But as a collective member, I can say that I think the origins of the collective came from a place of pain and invisibility, from a place of not seeing your reflection anywhere, from a place of feeling very isolated as a Black queer person. And so in the beginning, and I, you know, thank the good Lord for the internet, because we do a lot of work with generations that are older than us, and when that wasn't available, obviously that made it a lot harder to congregate and celebrate. So what Brooklyn Boyhood was established for is essentially to recognize a specific type of struggle, recognize the resilience that comes of that, and to celebrate that population for surviving. So we do a lot of different things, from, like I said, calendars to parties to just creating safe spaces. We do Boys' Days. We have an anthology coming out that celebrates stories from our community, written by our community. And in every way, what we're trying to do is uplift that vision, uplift that story, and make sure that the people who are telling the story are from that community, right? Because a lot of what we see is us being studied. That's not what this is. This is from the community, by the community, presented to the world. And that's the point of the collective.
When I sort of first started doing whatever it is I do, I mean, I started a blog in 2012. I was sort of processing my gender. This was like maybe just before I got my first suit. And I decided to process it in public, and to see if that might, if doing that might invite others to join me doing that. And it did. I mean, that's the reality of the internet. Thank goodness it's there. And sort of participating in that realm, and getting people's feedback and learning about other folks' identities convinced me, reminded me really that there's so many of us. We're everywhere, And once I had that experience getting my first suit made, I knew that there had to be a better version of that process. I knew it had to be more affordable. I knew it didn't have to be $1,500. Like, I broke into a sweat when I swiped my credit card. I was only 25 years old. I didn't have $1,500, Had a credit card limit that allowed that. So I knew that there had to be a way for someone, like a queer identified person, to have that experience without it being, without it feeling, as badly as it felt for me. And without them having to make themselves as legible as I had to, repeatedly make myself. I was translating myself to a person. It just felt, it was needlessly complicated. So, I think that when you have a very strong feeling about something, like, you got to trust your gut. You know what I mean? I thought maybe I'll make like a pair of pants for one person, and then they'll have pants that they can leave the house in and just take care of their business and wear their pants. And those pants will fit them, and they can wear them, and that's it. And like, that will be my contribution to like society, like on a sartorial level, right? But obviously there are far more people who needed, to have access to this experience. And then more important than that, it's just, we're holding up a mirror to a much larger community. And every time I get a mic near my face, I just say, there's so many more of us. There's so much more to it, So I think that trusting your gut and knowing that our community is expansive and diverse, there's always going to be, there's always going to be folks who identify with you and believe in your vision and share it.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Anita. Thank you to all of our incredible panelists. Thank you all for coming tonight. It was a pleasure to have you. And I think maybe there was one question over there. If you guys would stick around so they could ask, that'd be great. But otherwise, you know what? Why don't we all hear it? I think we have time.
Yeah. Thank you. So you spoke a little bit to this already when you spoke about building online communities. But I'm curious what we can all do as audience members, generally as consumers. What can we do to further all of the changes that you all represent in fashion?
I mean, I'll just say quickly that I think that when you see something that is conservative and regressive, to openly challenge it. Whether that be writing to H&M and saying, hey, just so you know, I visited your store, they didn't have X, Y, and Z, not sure why, that kind of constant like digging can
Customer
make a difference.
feedback. That's
Yeah.
really important. It's a powerful tool, your voice. Most people think that if you send in an email, it won't be heard, but on the contrary. So if you think something's not right, exercise that keyboard, send it in, and voice your opinion. They listen. They really do.
I would also say show up.
Yeah.
Because Dapper Q is a volunteer collective, Brooklyn Boyhood as well. So, it's great when we're all in celebration of the final product, but also it would be great if, to actually lend your voice, lend your talents, lend your time to this community that we're building, because it takes a lot. And so, I know the work that Brooklyn Boyhood has done has just impacted me so much, and I want to show up and give back to that and not just consume it. So that would be helpful as well.
And I think I would like to add something that to the answer to this question. So in the fashion world now, the magazine would look at the model Instagram and the agency, modeling agency Instagram, how much follower you have. So it depends on that. So please follow our Instagram account. At Trans Models NYC.
Okay, well, I actually think that was a perfect place to end. So thanks to everyone again, and have a great night.
Thank you.